The Palo Alto Baylands comprise a fascinating assemblage of habitats and wildlife species along the Pacific Flyway. But one of the most magical events, in my opinion, is happening right now along this footpath near the Lucy Evans Interpretive Center in mid to late April 2026. Anise swallowtail caterpillars are actively feeding on fennel plants prior to changing to the chrysalis stage and then finally the adult butterfly. But you ask, isn't fennel a non-native plant, so how come this butterfly is focusing on that plant? The Anise swallowtail has evolved to lay its eggs on a narrow range of plants, basically those in the carrot family with a strong anise or licorice scent. Hence the name Anise swallowtail. That is, a swallowtail that feeds on anise-scented plants. Fennel was introduced into California in the early 1800s, and by about 1850 was noted by French naturalist Pierre Loquin, who collected specimens in California during the gold rush, that this swallowtail caterpillar was already feeding on this plant. The swallowtail adapted to fennel quite quickly, because fennel is also a member of the carrot family and contains those anise chemicals to which the swallowtail was already familiar. Indeed, now that the fennel is so widespread, it is the prime food for this butterfly. Here's one of the many fennel plants along this path, this one being quite close to the Lucy Evans Center. If we zoom in, we see two anise swallowtail caterpillars, the small black one at the bottom being quite young, very recently hatched, while the larger green one is nearing maturity and will soon go into its chrysalis stage prior to emerging as a beautiful butterfly. In fact, as it grows, the caterpillar molts or sheds its skin 4 times, which means it has 5 caterpillar stages, each one called an instar. The first 2 instars are small with a black body and orange spots, while instars 3 to 5 are progressively larger with a green body and yellow spots. The caterpillar moves around very nimbly while feeding, and while it might appear that it uses its eyes to find and select target areas, it's not the case. In fact, it's done by scent and touch. It does have 6 eyes, called ocelli, on each side of the head, but they're very simple and can't form images. They can simply detect light versus dark and sense movement or shadow, so they provide a sense of orientation, whether the caterpillar is on the exposed or shaded side, sense a predator's shadow, and so on, but no more. The caterpillar has chemoreceptors in its mouthparts, its antennae, and even body, so that it can identify plant chemistry as well as being sensitive to leaf edges and stems. So between the simple eyes, chemical and tactile receptors, it is aware of chemical gradients, surface textures, and light intensity changes, but not shapes, colors, or images. Amazingly, as it goes through metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly, it develops compound eyes of between 6,000 to 10,000 segments, each with its own lens and photoreceptor cells. Each segment detects a tiny portion of the visual field that its brain then combines into a mosaic image. The transition from caterpillar to chrysalis shown here is a complicated and delicate affair as the caterpillar stops eating and separates itself from the skin of its last instar. On separating from the skin which falls away, the pupa creates a silk pad at its rear end to attach itself to whatever plant or tree that it's using as an anchor. Then it spins a silk strand from its body to another part of the plant to give it stability when it is hanging down from the silk-based pad. Unlike most chrysalises, it hangs at an angle, sometimes horizontal as here, rather than the normal vertical position. Even as it is working the silk supports, its external body will be drying and hardening to create a hard, robust, protective exterior. Meanwhile, internally and out of our sight, the pupa is preparing to transform from a leaf-eating organism with feet and very simple eyes to a nectar-eating flying butterfly with compound eyes. This is accomplished by clusters of undifferentiated cells that are pre-programmed to become wings, legs, eyes, antennae, genitalia, and so on, a process that lasts for 10 to 20 days, depending mostly on environmental conditions. Here's an interesting situation. This second active pupa had just separated from its last instar skin and was itself preparing the silk support strands. However, the silk support system that it wove trying to attach itself to the existing chrysalis didn't work out well. It seems that instead of first attaching its rear end with a silk slab, it was working on that single strand and time just ran out. Anyway, after a day or so it had dropped off, which means death for that particular pupa. And here is an adult Anise swallowtail foraging for nectar on a Prida Madeira plant nearby. This plant is originally from the island of Madeira, a part of Portugal, although closer to the coast of Morocco, and it has some remarkably interesting properties that make it an absolute magnet for hummingbirds, butterflies, and many other insects. However, this non-native plant, while a great nectar producer, is unsuitable as a food source for butterflies or any other insect. Therefore, even if this butterfly is a female, she is not looking for a suitable egg-laying location, she is simply feeding herself. You can see her proboscis probing the flowers. You'll notice that the flowers are shallow, not deep and tubular, which means that many insects as well as hummingbirds can easily forage for nectar and, in so doing, pollinate the plant. This is a generalist plant and attracts many pollinators. The foraging swallowtail can be quite territorial, as in the case here where it harassed an Anise hummingbird. It didn't seem necessary because there were two large plants, both with plenty of flowers and thus nectar, but territorial behavior is inbuilt and automatic.